Hi, I'm Wayne Sotil. It's great to be back with you. Thanks to the First Health Foundation and Kathy Stockman for inviting me. It's always a pleasure. I'll begin with a quote. Life's about love and work. Sigmund Freud said that. Now, that might be the only thing old Sigmund got right in his cocaine-induced haze, but he nailed that one. Bearing that in mind, I want to pose a question that points to the most powerful predictor of resilience suggested by over 75 years of research on the psychology of work, well-being, and marriage-family life. The question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy would you say you are? Now, if you don't like the word happy, substitute how satisfied are you with the direction your life is taken, the direction your relationship journey is on. How happy would you say you are? Now, no cheating. You got to tell the truth. I learned the dangers of cheating not in my professional life, but in my personal life. I grew up in South Louisiana on the cusp of Cajun territory. Donaldsonville, Louisiana is where I grew up. Any of you see that goofball show Swamp People, where people are catching alligators with their hands and wearing white rubber boots? Most of the episodes are filmed 9 miles from the house I grew up in. Cajuns are interesting. I'm Italian, but I grew up in that Cajun culture. Cajuns get the right concept, wrong application of things, and they tend to ignore the obvious. The master practitioners of Cajun logic were my brother Glenn and my cousin Bonadonna. Now, just like all the good old boys from South Louisiana, we all wanted to go to LSU. That was certainly true in my family. Glenn and Bonadonna took the entrance exam on the same day, made the same score. So when a few months later, the director of admissions letter came to Glenn saying, "Welcome to LSU, Mr. Glenn," we gave a big party for both the cousins because we knew they're going to move to Baton Rouge, live together, go to LSU. So it was a shock to us when a couple of weeks after the party, Bonadonna's letter came and it said, "Mr. Bonadonna, we wish you luck in finding another placement." Bonadonna got incensed and went marching into the director of admissions office and said, "I'm going to sue y'all behinds for discriminating. Y'all done discriminate against me just because I'm Italian living in this Cajun land. My cousin and me took the same test on the same day, made the same score. Y'all said, 'Come on in here, Mr. Glenn. Welcome to LSU.' Y'all said, 'Get out of here, Mr. Bonadonna. We don't want to see you no more. I'm going to sue y'all for discriminating.'" Man said, "Mr. Bonadonna, you might want to sue us for discrimination, but before you do, let me give you some data. For example, answers to question number 72, to which Mr. Glenn responded, 'I don't know.' And Mr. Bonadonna, your response was, 'Me neither.' No cheating. You got to tell the truth about how happy you are. And it relates to how happy you are with what the work of your life is and how your family journey is going. Now, we define family in a lot of different ways. I'm going to refer to the marriage-family journey with full respect of cultural diversity. Not everyone is married. Not everyone is living a traditional lifestyle. But the information I'm going to present applies to any long-term relationship. It's born from research and clinical work with couples at all stages of the journey. So please give me some poetic license and apply the concepts and the tactics and strategies that differentiate those couples of all sorts who are thriving versus those who are not, to whichever long-term relationship is important to you in your life. It's easy to make happy at first because when we first fall in love, we're infatuated. Infatuation is one of the most powerful mind-body states we've ever studied. When you're in a novel romantic circumstance, particularly one that is fraught with a little bit of drama, a little bit of taboo, you get this blast of phenylethylamine. This is a neurohormonal concoction that's an amphetamine-like substance. You remember when you have a crush on someone? It's like you're on speed. It blunts your need for sleep. It blunts your pain receptor. You could have a nail in your foot and you'd think, it's still a good day because I'm going to get to see this person I have a crush on. Well, that PEA, phenylethylamine, also promotes selective perception. Now, this is very important in putting relationship dynamics into perspective. Filled with PEA, we see what we need to see and be how we need to be in order to create the illusion of oneness, the illusion of oneness. The two of us together make one whole person. I'm shy, you're outgoing. If we get together, I don't have to overcome my shyness, and my outgoingness complements you. I'm kind of chaotic internally. You are so organized. It makes me feel safe. My first family hurt me. Your first family is so loving and accepting to me. The two of us together make one whole person. Unfortunately, it's not made to last. Familiarity calms that kind of neurochemistry. Otherwise, our brains would fry. So within the first year to 2 to 3, the familiarity of sound, of image, of smell of the other person doesn't light you up like a Christmas tree. When in the early stages of the journey, the neurophysiologists, the neurological imaging people have shown that just the memory of the person you have a crush on triggers your pleasure centers in your brain. That's why when we're first dating, we do goofball things like save ticket stubs to a concert, and you can smell them and smell the cologne or the perfume or the person you love. Your brain lights up like a Christmas tree. 2 or 3 years later, if that continued to happen, your brain would fry. So familiarity starts to calm all that physiological reaction. What's also true is behavior shift. When we're first getting together, we're just like information thieves about each other. What do you think? What do you feel? What do you dream of? What are you concerned about? And let me remember that and respond. 3 years later, we're not paying so much attention. 5 to 11 years later, if we're charting this stuff on a graph, it's very high. 2 or 3 years there's a blip. 5 to 7 years, there's a landslide. Now, we tend to think that has to do with having children. Well, we have children, so we have less privacy, there's less fun, we have less energy. All that's true. But what's also true is the same kind of dip in intimacy, however we measure it. How often you hold hands, make love, say something nice to your partner, about your partner in front of other people, give your partner a little surprise. All those things that make nice, make happy, if you will. We start withholding 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in a relationship. So if you look at the intimacy graph, it goes like this. And for many of you, I'm encouraging you to look back with a sense of forgiveness. Yeah, we went through that. Most couples go through that. That doesn't mean we're a bad couple necessarily. Those of you who are going through this right now, rethink and reframe. Oh, maybe this is what this is about. It's the normal developmental kind of journey that couples go on. Those of you who are still all brain damaged and in love, I wish you well, but you're probably going to encounter this valley too. It's an inevitability in relationships for most people. And it also happens for people who don't have children. It's not just about lack of or loss of privacy. It's really about disillusionment. Compared to when we're all infatuated, believing we totally complete each other, we wake up 5, 6, 7 years later and we realize not only do you not complete me, you aggravate me to death sometimes. And the very thing that attracted me to you starts to aggravate me. When we first got together, your family's so big in love and makes me feel complete. Later on, I'm thinking, why don't they call before they come? You're so organized, it makes me feel safe. Later on, why don't you ever lighten up, for goodness sakes? In various ways, we go through this before marriage, after marriage shuffle that I talked about in our last visit. Now, to continue that, I want to caution us. A lot of people at that point of loss of infatuation get disillusioned, give up being nice, give up being intimate, give up being forgiving, give up being charming, give up making happy or making nice, live semi-miserably ever after and call it normal, justifying it saying everybody I know been married this long treats each other this way. Well, there's an option that we all have. The option is get through the valley and then bounce forward and come out more mature, more reasonable in our expectations. Those are the couples married, my wife and I, and partner in practice forever. And now Rebecca and Julia, our daughters who are partners in our practice. Those are the couples who we've always been fascinated by and studied and learned from. Who gets through hard times, bounces forward with more realistic coping roadmaps. In other words, what makes the difference between the people who are struggling or bailing out, saying, I got double-crossed, I'm gonna go find another perfect lover, and start the journey all over again? What makes the difference between those people and the people who get through the hard time, comes through it and say, you know what, we've got a renewed kind of trust and intimacy and friendship and appreciation of each other. And it's sustainable. It's not the frivolous infatuation, but it's deep and mature and stable love and romance. What makes the difference between those two? Well, what makes the difference in a nutshell is that the couples who thrive are heroes for each other. Heroes create safe spaces for other people. They do that in some obvious ways, and they do it in many, many subtle ways. And the question here is, are you a hero? Something bad happened, man. Bonadonna got into a big truck accident and busted his back up and filed for disability. Well, after months and months and months of this, he ended up in court. The insurance company was contesting the disability claim. And the insurance company's lawyer had him on the stand and was grilling him. He said, Mr. Bonadonna, isn't it true that at the scene of the accident, when the highway patrolman showed up and asked, how are you feeling? Your response was, everything's fine, I feel great. Bonadonna said, yes, sir, I did say that, but let me say, he interrupted him. He said, didn't you say everything is fine, I feel great, when the patrolman asked, how are you feeling? Yes, sir, I said, but I wanted to explain. Finally, the judge intervened, and the judge said, let the man talk. So Bonadonna said, thank you, Your Honor. Here's what happened. I was trailering my favorite mule, Clarice, down Highway 1 next to Bayou Lafourche to go to Thibodeau because her feet was hurting and I wanted to get her some new shoes, and there's some good blacksmith people there. Well, the fog was coming up off that bayou. I couldn't see where I was going, and next thing I know, I ran my truck in the bayou and turned it over, and the mule trailer's turned over, and I was all busted up in my back, and I was laying there, and I could hear my mule moaning and groaning. And then this highway patrolman showed up. I saw him walk over there, and I heard him say, this mule got 3 broken legs. He pulled out his big pistol, shot my mule in the head. Then he turned over to me, that gun was smoking, and he said, how you feeling? The question is, when it comes to your relationship, the question is, are you a safe space? In big ways and in little ways. Now, this gets to the theme of our visit. 40 years plus unfolding research on what differentiates thriving marriages versus those who either end or flounder and struggle suggests that it takes a lot to make a happy marriage family journey. Of course it does. We'll talk about that. But on a given Tuesday afternoon and on a given Wednesday evening, what differentiates the thriving couples and families from those who flounder is typically about 10 minutes a day, according to research by John Gottman and others. John Gottman from the University of Washington, who is a preeminent family and marriage researcher, who has taught us that we live big, busy lives. Thriving couples do, miserable couples do. When people get miserable, they blame the stress factors in their life on why they're treating each other in ways that damage the relationship. The happy couples have the same amount of stress. What they've got is more experience. The happy couples have the same amount of stress. What differentiates them is that more regularly they are safe spaces for each other in our terms. Now, a third name I want to mention, psychologist Peter Levine said, you know what, it's sort of like when we were kids and played dot to dot. You remember you get these little coloring book things and they got numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you connect the dots, it draws a clown or it draws a truck or something. Well, combining Gottman's notion, 10 minutes a day, with our notion, heroes create safe spaces for other people, with Peter's notion, it's dot to dot. I want you to think about the infinite ways that you can dot your loved one in fewer than 10 seconds or 20 seconds. There are a lot of ways you can do it. You can be a safe space, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Use a pet name, an act of affection, a statement of affirmation. I was bragging about you today. A compliment given in front. Well, here's what John Gottman says. He says the couples that differentiate, who get through hard times and come out stronger, they spend on average collectively 10 minutes a day. Now, we all know it takes more than that. Sometimes it takes we got to stop the train, we have to have a big encounter, we got to really talk about stuff and go deep. But on a given Tuesday or Wednesday, the couples that get through the hard times create arcs of caring connection with an email here, a text there, a compliment there, a word of forgiveness there. You're busy, but you got 10 minutes. You're busy, but you've got 20 seconds or 30 seconds. Think creatively. How can I create a safe space in a matter of seconds for each of my children, for each of my friends, for each of my loved ones? Secondly, I encourage you to think in terms of, it's not about getting rid of all of our stress factors. I've talked over and over again about the fact that most of us have been married for any length of time. We have chronic unresolved issues. In fact, those of us who are most happily married over 25 years, we tend to have 12 chronic unresolved issues that we aggravate each other about on a regular basis. What differentiates us is not absence of the issues, it's the presence of the uplifts. It's not absence of hassles, but presence of uplifts. So what we've got to do if we want to build happy marriage and family is we've got to pay attention not to the content, but to whether or not we're structuring our lives in a way that allow us to engage in processes that kick off byproducts that kill the weeds in the relationship garden and fertilize the right stuff. Think structure and process. You want to have some romance, you got to have some date nights. That's a structure, but it's not enough just to have the date night. You've also got to have the right process. You've got to show up with your teeth brushed and your hair combed and behave yourself and have some energy and interact in a way that doesn't focus on one of your 12 chronic unresolved issues. You know, if you do that, then it feels like an ambush. This is supposed to be fun and playful. You can do the other stuff another time. So thinking structure and process, let's talk about how we encounter challenges to the right processes and structures and what some solutions might be. Bearing in mind, it's about love and work. We're focusing on love and marriage family journey today. But also we're talking about 10 minutes a day, knowing that we got to spend more time than that sometimes. A challenge to the loving, playful process is the mythical balanced life. We're all scrambling around chasing a ghost. We've been sold a bill of goods, perpetuated by me and people in my generation, having come of age in the late 60s, early 70s, thinking we did something good. Cajun logic kicked in. Right concept, wrong application. You can have it all, men and women both. Picture four balls: great work, great family, great intimate relationship, and great self-health, mind, body, spiritual health. Now, it's a noble goal, but rigidly defining well-being as in the course of 1 week or month or even one chapter in my life, in many instances, I'm going to have perfect balance, just sets us up to have new age guilt. Because nobody's got that perfect balance. And what we've got to do is pay attention to what happens to us if we're pursuing something that we can't attain. Because then what happens is, in the process of pursuing balance, as noble as it is, we get so intense. Other people are not blessed by our efforts. They're hurt by our intensity. We stop being playful. We stop being gracious. We stop being generous in the ways that we were when we were first dating. And then it's 10 seconds here and 20 seconds there and 30 seconds there of tense interchange rather than loving interchange. And one of the difficulties is we don't see ourselves the way other people see us. Something bad happened. Marie Tartarich, Tina Bonadonna, and Clotilde Thibodeau all died. They went to heaven. St. Peter met him at the gate. He said, look, y'all can come in here and stay here forever in heaven if you follow one rule. Don't step on the ducks. We got millions and millions of ducks in here. Don't step on the ducks. They said, okay, let him in. Clotilde was there one day. She stepped on a duck. Next thing you know, St. Peter came dragging by a chain, the ugliest man anybody ever seen in their life. He had him chained by his neck, and he chained Clotilde by her neck, and he said, nah, y'all stuck with each other forever. I told you, don't step on the duck. A week went by, Marie Tartarich stepped on a duck. Next thing you know, St. Peter dragged another ugly, ugly man, chained their necks together, said, you stuck with this forever. You stuck with a duck, stepped on a duck. 3 months went by. Tina Bonadonna was having such a good time in heaven. She loved it. And then one day, St. Peter came in. There was a murmur in the crowd. He had attached to a chain the most gorgeous-looking Cajun man anybody had ever seen. He was an Adonis. He walked up to Tina, hooked the chain around Tina's neck, walked away, and Tina coyly said to the handsome man, nah, what made us deserve this? The handsome man said, I don't know about you, lady, but I stepped on a duck. We don't see ourselves the way other people see us, particularly when it comes to the intensity of I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that, I'm trying to do that, I'm juggling all these balls. I want to be all things to all people. I'm working and I'm going to be the den mother and I'm going to have date night and I got to do my yoga and I got to get my workout. We drive ourselves crazy in ways that no prior decade, not just prior generation, no prior decade of people or couples have driven themselves. The standards of good enough have elevated. Not great, but good enough. What does it take to be a good enough son or daughter to an aging parent, husband or wife, man or woman? We drive ourselves with this mythical balanced life, and then we get intense. We get driven by type A behavior pattern, this time-urgent, competitive sense of having to be all things to all people, even if it kills me and them in the process. We start multitasking as a way of life. We finish each other's sentences in order to speed up, and we think we're doing a good thing. I'm just finishing your sentence to try to help you keep track of what you're saying, right? And the more type A we get, the more stressed we get, the more anxious we get, the more type A we get, the more we start doing unnecessary things, like scanning for whether or not people are following the rules. We think we're the keepers of the rules. That, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. I was stopped at a stoplight, and the person in front of me real clearly did not understand the type A rules. I was second in line at a stoplight. This guy in this first in line at the stoplight, he seemed to be enjoying being at the red light. He rolled the window down, he stuck his head out, looking at the sun. I could hear him singing, he was listening. He was enjoying being at a stoplight. We type A's, we know the rules. If you first in line at a stoplight, you're supposed to spend the entire time squeezing on your steering wheel, staring at the green light in the other lane of traffic, daring it to turn yellow, because as soon as yours turns green, you can jam on your accelerator to gain a 1/1,000,000th of a second head start in the race with the guy next to you to get the privilege of stopping first at the next stoplight. That's what we're supposed to do, right? We don't see ourselves the way other people see us. And the problem is that the more type A we get chasing after that balanced life, the more right we think we are. You got to beware of the dangers of always being right, because there's some Cajun logic there. Right concept, wrong application, ignoring the obvious. 3 men were scheduled to get electrocuted. They strapped the first one in an electric chair. Executioner said, you got any last words? The guy said, yeah, I went to the University of North Carolina. I believe in Almighty God, the goodness of mankind. Executioner flipped the switch, nothing happened. He said, by law, you are free to go. The execution failed. Second one got strapped in, said, you got any last words? The guy said, yep, I went to Wake Forest University. I believe in Almighty God, the goodness of mankind. The executioner flipped the switch, nothing happened. Said, you're free to go. Third one got strapped in. He said, yeah, my name is Tipper Thibodeau. I went to LSU just for like 5 days. I dropped out. It was too hard. And look, I like God and my friends and all this, but I want to say this. You ain't never going to electrocute nobody, Hoss, till you connect them 2 little wires that's hanging down in the back there. The question is, do you want to be right or do you want to survive? We have to beware of the effects that our coping style is having on relationships that matter to us. It's not about you're not nobly intended. It's about whether or not your way of coping with this juggling act, work, family stuff, the mythical balanced life, is making you so intense that you're messing up the 10 seconds, the 20 seconds, the 10 minutes a day. The second thing is we need to be claiming of and aware of our relationship rituals if we want to have the right structure that drives the right process. What are the ways that you habitually create time for relationship building in your life? One thing that's important is to recognize naturally occurring rituals and let them count. Carpooling is a naturally occurring structure that, if you allow it, will be a time when you can have a process of checking in, caring, lovingly interacting, rather than all of us being on our screens. If we control the invasion of technology at meal times, and encourage you to be flexible in developing your rituals. The notion of we eat dinner together as a family every night is a noble notion, and good for you if you're able to do that, but don't be rigid about it. You know, it may be that you need a different ritual, given all your collective schedules. It counts if we're together and we're lovingly interacting. You know, you don't want it to be that you find yourself with the right structure, we're having family dinner, but the wrong process, signaled by things like things coming out of your mouth you never imagined you would say, like, sit down, shut up and eat it, you little brat. I cooked this after working all day. We're a loving family, so we're having loving family dinner. What's the deal, Lucille? It might be better to get some takeout. Your grandma could cook that meat and 3 vegetables and everybody gather in front of the fire because life was less complicated. Now, I'm sure your grandmother had a difficult life. I don't mean to be insulting or discounting of that. But don't use an outdated yardstick to measure how well you are doing in your family. Create your own rituals. And also be clear on what the ritual is. The way couples get in trouble sometimes is one of you thinks you're having a communication ritual. We're sitting down and we're touching base with each other. The other one thinks it's a romance ritual. You know, one person thinks it's just winding down the day and touching base, renewing our friendship in loving connection. The other person thinks it's foreplay. You're going to have trouble. So be clear on the definition of the ritual. Pay attention to the effect of your coping. Don't get so lost chasing the mythical balanced life as you get type A, and then people walking out the door backwards when you come in because you're too intense. You're well intended, but too intense. Secondly, protect your rituals. Third, have fun. You fall in love with people who make you feel safe enough to come out to play. You stay in love with people who make you feel safe enough to come out to play. Once a week, people in our coaching and counseling say, I think I might have to get a divorce. How come? I'm bored. And our challenge is, are you bored or are you boring? When's the last time you made something different happen? When we're all brain damaged and in love, infatuated, we're very creative at being playful and making playful stuff happen. As we go further along, it ends up being that we get too conditional in how things have to be before we're playful with each other. I want you to picture this graph. This is the number of conditions that have to be present as time goes by. The number of conditions have to be present before you have affection or sex. Early in the relationship, like year 1, 2 conditions have to be present before you have sex. Both of you got to be alive, one of you got to be awake. There's going to be some sex going on sooner than later. As time goes by, the graphs go like this. There has to be so many days or weeks passed since the last time we had affection or sex. We had to have had 18 different conversations. You had to have taken out the garbage and said something nice, or at least 2 things nice about my mama. Then we might have a little bit smooching going on. We get too conditional about being playful with each other. And what happens is we get stingy back with each other. One of the Cajun logic things we need to avoid is misguided notions about what is good enough. How do you know whether or not you got a good enough romance? How do you know whether or not you got a good enough sex life compared to norms? The mistake people make is comparing themselves to their younger self. The mistake people make about aging is I compare my current self as a person who's 10, 15, 20, 30 years older than I used to be to my younger self. Now, if you're smart, you learn to adjust expectations. My body's 30 years older than it was. So compared to people my age, I'm doing pretty well. We tend not to do that in our marriages, particularly when it comes to our sex life and our romantic life. We keep comparing ourselves to some idealized notion. One way to think about this is whether it comes to how happy you are in general or how happy you are with your marriage, it's about balancing what you got versus what you expect or want. William James told us, he was a philosopher, psychologist from 100 years ago, the people who are most content in life are pretty good at balancing achievements over expectations in approximating a ratio of 1. Achievements over expectations. Now, it's easier said than done because what we tend to do is no matter what we achieve, we expect more. So we change the denominator. Think about it this way. If you give your children or grandchildren a gift on a scale of 1 to 10, you give them a 10. When you see how happy they are, you think, I should have given them a 15. Or Mary and I were laughing about this the other day. How did the weekend go? Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was about a 7. But I'll be thinking, it would have been a 10 if we hadn't had that little squabble, if she would just listen to me. Right? That's naturally what we tend to do because we deal with one of our 12. As a 12 crying, going to resolve this. But you know what? 7 is not bad if I let myself be satisfied with a 7. Resilient people are good at feeling good about what they're doing. Sometimes it's illogical, but it works. Bonadonna wasn't smart enough to get in LSU, but I went to LSU and Glenn went to LSU and he and I lived together. And Bonadonna moved to Baton Rouge because he loved us and he'd just hang around, tag along with us all the time. It was a Tuesday night and I was doing what I typically did when I was at LSU as an undergrad. I was in my bedroom studying. And Glenn and Bonadonna were doing what they always did, which was nothing. They were in another room, but this night they kept going, 26 days and high-fiving, 26 days and high-fiving. Finally, I went out and said, what are y'all doing? Bonadonna said, I told you what we're doing, Mr. Big Man, studying all the time, getting all your degrees. We bought us a jigsaw puzzle from the drugstore, put this sucker together. Look what it said on the box, 3 to 6 years. We put that sucker together, it didn't take us but 26 days. Now there are people, those are 2 people who balance their achievements and their expectations. They feel good about themselves. Now, this is difficult to do this day and time because we have this idealized notion about we're supposed to have this perfectly balanced life, which none of us have. But it's also difficult to feel good enough about our love and romance and sex life because we have these ridiculous media depictions of what other people are doing. Let me say, this is not a new phenomenon. This business of, how do I compare to that? We can't compare ourselves to unrealistic standards and feel good about what we're doing. You don't motivate yourself to do better by blaming or shaming. This is a very key concept. You're not going to be motivated to be a better communicator if your partner is constantly telling you you're a lousy communicator. You're not going to be motivated to be a better lover if you're constantly telling yourself, compared to what I see on that screen, much less in pornography, which is totally unrealistic, or in some literature, even classic literature, We're not always romantic. You're not going to motivate yourself watching people's selectively reported Facebook pages where they're just showing themselves having romance and, laughing all the time. In the trenches of real life, things are tough. And it's normal that we have tough times. And it's normal that it's not always spectacular when it comes to our communication or when it comes to what happens in the bedroom. We've got to learn to adapt, and we got to learn to feel good about what we got and what we're doing. So one day, Bonadonna's wife was at the stove, and he went snuggle up to her, and she slammed down the spatula and said, "Bonadonna, get in that bedroom right now. I got to make love right now, right now, right now. Get in that bedroom right now." And they went in the bedroom, and Bonadonna did every move he knew all the way back to college days, and he was doing all this fancy stuff and this and that, and then it was over. He was so happy. He was all glowing. His wife jumped up, ran back in the kitchen, went right back to the stove, and he came snuggling up all sexy, and he said, "Now, what was that all about just now?" She said, "Oh, my 2-minute egg timer broke. I wanted to make sure." You got to balance the achievements over. He felt good about it. You got to balance the achievements over expectations. You got to manage the effects of your coping. You got to protect your rituals. You got to have some fun. You also got to communicate. 10 seconds here, 20 seconds there, 30 seconds there. Let me give you a punchline here. How many times have you been told we need to communicate better? It's one of the chronic concerns expressed. It's one of the 12 chronic unresolved issues that people would like to have better communication. Mary told me the other day, there are 3 things I want you to understand. Number 1, you do not listen to me. The other 2 didn't register. I can't remember. If you Google men communication jokes, there's like 1,000 of them in Mr. Google, right? The key to good communication, let me just say, we could do a whole program just on communication. We'll probably ought to do one of those sometimes. But I want to give you a kind of a new news. It used to be we thought that we teach people how to communicate and things are going to get better. They're going to have fewer chronic unresolved issues. We now know in the marriage family field, what is most important is to get people to contribute to the goodwill bank account in the psychosocial gut of the relationship. Because a primary predictor of good romance, of longevity in a marriage, of satisfaction in marriage as we age, is protection of friendship. It's a primary predictor of all. It's like the carburetor that leads to, or the final common pathway that leads to all the other good stuff. If we protect friendship and we create structures that allow us to be playful, it kicks off all kind of good fertilizer, from fertilizing romance to fertilizing forgiveness to deepening understanding and trust with each other. Well, here, as in many aspects of the mental health world, we've shifted from a pathology focus to a strength focus. You don't get more of what you want by focusing on what you don't want. You get more of what you want by learning to focus on capturing the uplifting stuff. In marriage family, what we found is that more effective than teaching people how to argue is teaching them how to respond to each other's good news. There's several little pearls here I want to encourage you. Number 1, think about this. Somebody comes in and is glowing with good news. Something good happened. I got invited to join a board, or I got a raise at work. What are the possibilities? Number 1, a person can be actively destructive. That's finding the cloud in the silver lining. How much is the raise? Well, that's not enough to justify how much you work. Or great, you're going to be on that board, it's going to take more time. A person can be passively destructive. These are things not to do. That is, just don't make a deal of it at all. Don't acknowledge. Your loved one comes in excited about something, and your lack of response just deflates the excitement. A person can be passively constructive, and that is not make much of a deal of it. Oh, well, that's nice. I'm sure that made you happy. The magic is to be actively constructive in responding to your loved one's good news. Stop, look, listen, ask at least 3 questions about it. Turn the television off. That is fantastic. When did you find out? How did it make you feel? That's wonderful. What do you think it's going to be like for you when you do that? Who else did you tell? Who can we tell now? I'm so proud of you. Look, you're going to respond. It's going to take this much energy to respond positively or negatively, constructively or destructively. Make it constructive. Another one of these communication keys, there's a strategy that says, as born of the research, the way people say goodbye in the morning drives their mood and the attributions they make, the thoughts they have about each other for the next 2 hours. If you guilt trip each other as you're walking out the door, as opposed to you connect lovingly for a moment, thank you for who you are. It allows me to be who I am in my life. I'm going to be thinking about you. You know how it feels if someone gives you that gift. You soar for a while. Secondly, we coach people, pay attention to how you say hello after you've been apart. Because it sets the tone for the next couple hours of the evening if you go in your separate ways and come back. Clear your head. There are no super people who live or work in those buildings. Let me pay attention to how I am. Heroes create safe spaces for other people. When I'm going home, let me just stop, look, and listen congruently for seconds at a time, for minutes at a time. And it sets the tone of loving connection for the rest of the evening. What we've also got to do is pay attention to whether or not we communicate in a way that's effective. And the thing you want to avoid, according to the great research again of John Gottman, is a hot startup. You never, I'm sick and tired of. Who do you think does that more frequently, men or women? Women do it 5 times more frequently than men, according to the research, because you wait too long. It's like blowing air into an internal balloon. Finally, you take it, then it pops, and then there's a hot startup. Beware of second step in the fatal to friendship 4-step shuffle here. The second step is defensiveness. I do not always. You said I always. Let me look through my computer and in my day in my calendar. Look, one time in 1996, I didn't do what you said. You're arguing semantics rather than taking the perspective. My God, if you're that upset about this, it must be that I do it more frequently than I realize. We don't see ourselves as other people see us. Hot startup, defensive reaction. The third thing to avoid is contemptuous dealings. Most of us don't like being blamed and shamed. So then we withdraw or strike back in a way that you always hurt the ones you love. We do soul level damage when we say things like, the older you get, the more you remind me of your mama in the worst ways that you don't like your mama. God, all of us should like our mothers. I'm not blaming anything on any of us parents. But then if you don't watch out, if you're doing that hot startup, defensive reaction, contemptuous interaction, then you get the big shutdown. Wall goes up. You can talk all you want. I'm channel surfing, click. Your lips are moving. I'm not listening. Who does that more frequently, men or women? Men, 3 times more frequently than women. Communicating, catch each other doing things right. Beware of that 4-step shuffle. And finally, when it comes to communication, it's really important to pay attention to the repair attempts. Now, this gets us to a 5th factor. You want to spend 10 minutes a day paying attention to how you cope, to relationship rituals, to having some fun, to how you communicate, and how you forgive. Seeking and granting forgiveness. How many times do I need to say, I'm sorry? Well, I have an answer for you. Until you apologize appropriately and ask for forgiveness. See, this is not apology. This is how most people apologize. Look, I'm sorry I did what I did, but I did what I did because you did what you did. And if you did what you did again, I'm going to do what I did again. That's not an apology. That's a debate. An apology goes like this. I've thought about it a bunch, what happened, and I really want you to hear something. Please, will you listen? I am so sorry. I realized when I did what I did, It must have made you feel such and such. And I know that's awful for you. I promise you, I'm not going to do that again. To the best of my ability, I'm going to try to never do that again. I think I did it for reasons, it doesn't matter why I did it. But you didn't deserve for me to do that. But let me apologize with some insight about, I can take responsibility. I got overstressed and I did whatever, and then I struck out. Now, the other person, incidentally, if you do that, is, listen, well, you've got some insight in it. If you just say, I'm sorry, I don't know why it happened, they've got no reason to trust you. I'm apologizing with insight about how I impacted you and why I behaved the way I did, and this is the magic. And I'm asking you, please forgive me. Now, in the real world, if you're the target of that kind of apology, I think what's appropriate is to say, I'm going to try as hard as I can. If you choose, forgiveness is a choice of a philosophy. It doesn't just happen automatically, particularly if what has happened has damaged trust. I'm going to try to forgive you as best I can today, and tomorrow I'll try to forgive you some more. But forgiveness and trust recovery are first cousins. And so if you're apologizing about something, know that you're committed to resetting the trust factor in your relationship. And the trust formula is pretty clear. Step 1, say what you're going to do. Step 2, do it. Step 3, repeat steps 1 and 2 200 times. Then you kick off the byproduct of having killed the wound, healed the wound, and forgiveness happens. We got to pay attention to our coping style. We have to elevate to the status of ritual some of the stuff we're doing and create some new rituals to allow us to connect lovingly with each other. We got to have some fun. We got to communicate. We got to forgive. We got to have fairness. Do you get and give stuff of equivalent value in your marriage? That's a complicated question. The answer is usually complicated anyway. We're all doing the best we can. There's more than 200% of stuff that needs to be done. But what's important is that we balance our relationship ledger sheet with some regularity. Bandana asked Glenn one time, if I make love to your wife, does that make us related? Glenn said, no, but that make us even. See, that's a balancing the relationship. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. That's not a good thing for anybody to do. One time, Bonadonna and his wife were watching TV, and TV came on. Somebody said something about mixed emotions. Bonadonna said, that's a woman thing. Men don't ever have mixed emotions. And Tina looked at him and said, of course men have mixed emotions. Bonadonna, what you talking about? I never have a mixed emotion, he said. I always know exactly what I feel. Tina said, I bet you $100 I can make you have a mixed emotion. He said, that you go on, I bet you $100. So Tina thought for a second. She said, between you, your first cousin Alphonse, and your brother Henry, I like making love to you the most. That thing you're feeling right now, that's a mixed emotion. Give me my $100. We have to balance our relationship ledger sheet. For younger couples, so often that means acknowledging, we're scrambling a bunch between work, family, our romance, our friendship, our intimate relationship, and trying to find time for ourselves. And the fact that I feel overstressed doesn't mean you're not doing your fair share much of the time. It means there's more than 200% of stuff for us to do. It's a beautiful thing to behold older couples balancing that ledger sheet, because it's often done with grace and with humility that is born of realizing I've complained and complained and complained to you about you in some fundamental ways. But at midlife and beyond, most of us, it dawns on us, I'm not such a piece of cake myself. And while I was complaining to you about the very stuff I complained about, I forgot to thank you for that stuff. I'll tell you this story. So we practiced in Winston-Salem for decades. I saw this couple intensely in marriage counseling for a period of time after the guy had an affair and really damaged the relationship. But they worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and got beyond it and established a new kind of relationship and worked on forgiveness and reestablished trust. Well, our intense counseling ended, but they continued to come back to see me every year or so for many, many years. They would come in for like a half a day tune-up, even though they had moved to another. Part of the recovery was they decided to move to another state because there were too many haunting bad memories of all that had happened in Winston-Salem. So I was scheduled to see this couple one morning at 9 o'clock, and the guy was there and the woman wasn't. And then we said, okay, well, let's get started. We got started, and about a half an hour later, a woman came in, and she had been crying and crying, it looked like. And he was concerned. I said, how are you doing? And she said, I went driving around our old neighborhood, and when I drove past our house on Avalon where we used to live, I just got overwhelmed with emotion. And he just got crestfallen. He said, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I should never have done what I did when we were living there. And she said, wait a minute, you don't understand. I wasn't upset about you. I was upset thinking about how I was at that stage of our marriage. I thought about the fact that I was always so angry with you then. I realized it would be a snow day, the kids would be home from school, and you were always working so hard. You would go to the hospital to work, and I was so angry with you. It never dawned on me that maybe you wished you could stay home sometime. I cried and cried and cried, thinking about I never thought of you in those scenarios. And then it dawned on me our son is now the age you were then. And we know he and his wife are going through their version of young children, juggling. And I cried and cried and cried, hoping that our daughter-in-law is treating our son better than I treated you during those times. I cried and cried, she said, thinking, if you hadn't been willing to work as hard as you did, we wouldn't have the security we have now. And I cried and cried and cried, realizing I never thanked you for working so hard. I worked with this CEO type guy who left his wife after 30 years of marriage. Incidentally, a sad fact, it used to be if you made it to about 20 years in marriage, you basically were bulletproof. Almost nobody got divorced beyond that, whether you liked each other or not. People stayed together. Not true anymore. The percentage of, the number of people who are going to get divorced married more than 35 years, the number of people who get divorced this year is 300% greater than the number of people who got divorced 35 years or more of marriage 15 years ago. Now, it's not 49%, it's not 50%. The absolute percentage of people who get divorced married over 30 years is still relatively small, but it's 3 times greater than it used to be. Well, the CEO guy epitomizes. He left his wife after 35 years, moved into a condominium that he bought, and had never been on his own, was never accustomed to taking care of himself. And he came in one day and he said, I was watching Monday Night Football, folding my underwear, and I broke down crying for the first time since our separation. And I said, what happened? And he said, the backstory is, he moved into this condominium and he just ran through all of his underwear, and so he went buy some more. And he did that 3 times. So he had, dozens of pairs of underwear because he never washed clothes. His wife always did. He sent all his other clothes to the dry cleaners. He said, finally, I had this apartment full of underwear that needed washing, so I washed it. And I was watching Monday Night Football, folding my underwear. And I don't know if it was the smell of the detergent, but it dawned on me, and all the emotion then came. For 35 years, my wife did this for me. She washed and folded and put away my underwear. And I realized, he said, not only did I never thank her for doing this, I never even noticed that she did. We've got to have fairness. Marriage is about a lot of things. It's about growing beyond our self-focus. It's about deciding the philosophies that are going to guide our life together. Are we going to protect our friendship? Are we going to forgive? Because there are no perfect people and there is no perfectly stress-free, disappointment-free journey. Or are we going to balance our achievements over expectations and do it again and again and again when it comes to our rituals, our sex life, our communication, our definition of what good enough juggling is, work-life balance, imbalance is? Or we're going to forgive each other? Or we're going to balance our ledgers? More than anything, I think that good marriage is about being a safe space for each other. It's about being a hero in that way. Now, when I say heroes create safe spaces for other people, who do you think of? Who in your life has been that hero? If you're lucky, it's each other. Beyond all the hype, beyond all the infatuation, the real deal call to character, when the going gets rough, you find out who is open-hearted, open-minded, forgiving, compassionate, selfless, other-oriented. The people who dive when the going gets rough get closed-minded, closed-hearted, stingy, withholding, vindictive. When I say heroes create safe spaces for other people, I can't help but think of my grandparents. All four of them. These people who had no money, no education, no sophistication. Every memory I have of my grandparents, they were just being generous and gracious to me. They were happy to see me. No matter how I felt before I walked in the house, when I walked in and saw how excited they were, my grandmother Sotia used to say, it's Mr. Wayne. My day just got better. The most generous and gracious couple in my lifetime were my maternal grandparents, my Milano grandparents. I remember so many times I would drive up or be driven up to my grandparents' house, and my grandfather, Milano, would be on the front porch. He would be so excited to see me. He'd jump up, he'd come hobbling down the steps. I think he's going to kill himself one day coming down those steps. And he would literally be kind of shuffling around, waiting for me to get out of the car, all the way until I was an adult, so he could hug and kiss me. And then this is the point I want to make. Every memory, he would then immediately start steering me with his right arm. And he'd say, come on, we're going to go see your mom. You're going to make her some happy today. My grandmother was always in the back of their shotgun-style house, cooking or washing or whatever she was doing. And the same scene would unfold. That got more and more touching to me. The older I got, and God knows now, it just melts my heart to remember. We'd be walking through the house. My grandfather was always in front of me, and he'd be saying, Belle, somebody's here to see you, gonna make you something happy today. And I swear, I'd walk in, and my grandmother would look up and say, thank you, Lord, now I'm happy. My day just got better. So I'm gonna close with this story. My grandparents would then often say, come on, let's go sit on the front porch. I was in graduate school at this time, and I was home visiting. And we went on the front porch, and my grandmother crocheted, just like knitting, and she was great at that. And so we went on the front porch in South Louisiana. It was summertime, and my grandmother brought some newspaper to put on her lap to keep the mosquitoes off, and put her crochet in her lap. And my grandmother never looked up through this whole story. My grandfather was in the rocking chair, and I was in the rocking chair next to his, and he was always interested in me. He felt like such a safe space, and he was asking me about stuff, and he asked me, well, buddy, you got a girlfriend yet? And it dawned on me, they had just had their 55th wedding anniversary or something. And I said, how did y'all meet? My grandfather loved to tell stories. He said, I never told you that story. And I said, no, I don't know that story. And my grandmother smiled and just kept crocheting. My grandfather said, in those days across the river, we live right on the Mississippi River, across the river in Gonzales, every Saturday there used to be what they called jitney dances, he said. And we'd all take the ferry across the river and go to the school gymnasium, and the boys would pay the girls a nickel to dance with them. And the girls would donate all the nickels to the church. Your grandma, he said, was the best dancer on both sides of the river. And my grandmother was kind of coy. She said, oh, I wasn't that good a dancer. He said, you were the best dancer, Belle. Me, he said, I couldn't dance a lick. But I'd go every Saturday and sit up in those bleachers and watch all the boys would be standing on line to dance with your mama. And boy, she would glide across that floor. I loved to watch her dance. I said, well, if you couldn't dance, how did you meet her? He said, well, your Uncle Lorenzo, that was his brother, your Uncle Lorenzo would tease me and tease me and tease me. And then finally I broke up my nerve and I stood in line, waited my turn, and I got my turn and I went to Mama and I said, oh, the story makes me cry. I got a nickel, but I can't dance. And your mom took my nickel and she said, that's all right. And then we stood up and we just shuffled around the way I do. And she was so nice to me, even though she was such a good dancer and I wasn't. That's when I fell in love with her. And he sat back, my grandmother smiled. He said, your mama is still a great dancer. My grandmother said, oh, not with all my arthritis in my knees. He said, you still a great dancer, Belle. And me, he said, I still can't dance a lick. And I heard my grandmother say to her lap, after 55 years of marriage, and that's still all right. Then the only sound was the creaking of the rocking chairs and the pounding of my heart, because being in the presence of the safe space my grandparents created for each other was like being in a sacred space, created by their generosity and their graciousness. So my hope, my wish for you is while you're dealing with all the tough stuff that is the marriage family journey, you remember to just be generous and be gracious to each other. 10 seconds here, 20 seconds there, a minute here, 2 minutes there. Pay attention to your 10 minutes. Thank you very much.